Hi, everybody. I'm Mr. Wildcat. I hope you all having a wonderful day today. Now, before we get into what we're going to be doing today, let's just get it out of the way, shall we? You're probably wondering, what the fuck is Mr. Wildcat doing in a USC t-shirt? Well, it has to do with what we're going to be doing today. I'm not a fan of USC or UCLA. In fact, I despise both of them in different manners. And I am a Wildcat fan, live or die, deep in my heart. Okay? Wildcats will always be first. Okay? But for today's video, we're taking a step away and we are going to be taking a trip down memory lane in another manner. Now, this year, 2023, we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of one of the greatest and most prestigious sporting venues out there, the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. And that is where USC comes into play. All right? And this is where it's going to stay. All right? So before we dig, today we're going to be covering some of the major spotlights that the LA Coliseum has had the honors of holding over the past 100 years. But before we do, we're going to take a brief background of what the Coliseum is about. It is a multi-purpose stadium in the Exposition neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. Conceived as a hallmark of civic pride, the Coliseum was commissioned in 1921 as a memorial to Los Angeles veterans in World War I. Okay, and it was completed in 1923, May 1st, 1923 to be exact. Okay, with renovations in 1930, 1964, 1977 to 78, 1983, 1993, 1995, 2011, and 2017 through 2019. Okay. Coliseum originally cost $954,872, which in today's figures is 16.4 million. Okay. Okay. Coliseum is jointly owned by the state of California's 6th District Agricultural Association, along with Los Angeles County and the City of Los Angeles. It is managed and operated by the Auxiliary Services Department of the University of Southern California, which is what USC is short for. USC granted naming rights to United Airlines in January 2018 after concerns were raised by the Coliseum Commission, which has public oversight of USC's management and operation of the Coliseum. The airline agreed to become the title sponsor of the playing field, naming it the United Airlines Field at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. Okay. So when you just watch USC football, you see that United Airlines logo on the field. That's what that's all about. All right. So why don't we dig into? There's like 9 different topics we're going to be covering, commemorating the 100 years of the Coliseum. And there's no time to kill. So why don't we get into action, shall we? First, we're going to talk about is college football, the primary usage of the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. Okay. Now, the Coliseum was pretty much built for USC football. After all, it was built right next to the USC campus. Okay. It has been home to USC football ever since the school opened up, ever since the stadium opened up. Okay. USC has also been a part of the Pacific Coast Conference and all of its affiliated, all of it, and every other name that the conference was affiliated with from its founding in 1922, and will end its affiliation on June 30th, 2024, when USC and its crosstown rival UCLA will be leaving for the Big Ten Conference. Will be joining other powerhouse schools, including Washington and Oregon, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State, Nebraska, Indiana, Wisconsin, just to name a few. Okay. Speaking of UCLA, UCLA was also a tenant of the LA Coliseum, playing their home games in this facility from 1928 through 1981. 19, UCLA began football play in 1919, and they joined the Pacific Conference in 1928, along with where they wound up playing alongside USC. The rivalry between USC and UCLA began around in the late 20s, but the rivalry would not kick into full gear until mid 1930s, around 1936. Okay, USC would basically be the USC and UCLA would both wear their home colors at the every time these two played each other in the Coliseum. Like, the game would from 19 from the from the time the Bruins moved in 1928 through the end of the 81 season. Anytime USC and UCLA played each other, the game was always held at the Coliseum. The home team would basically rotate back and forth every year. So USC would eventually become the designated home team on the odd years, while UCLA would become the designated team in the even years. Okay? And they would basically wear their home colors for each time that these two met. And that would continue until 1984. After the 81 season, UCLA moved out of the Coliseum and they wound up signing a long-term lease with the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, which is the home of the infamous Rose Bowl game played every January 1st. A bowl game that is traditionally reserved between the champions of the Pacific Coast Conference and the Big Ten, or is what known as Pac-12 versus Big Ten. And after this year, that affiliation will be going away, as the Rose Bowl will become part of the expanded college football playoff. Okay? So, moving on. Okay? Next up is the National Football League. The National Football League has hosted a couple of teams in the Coliseum. The Coliseum has hosted a couple of NFL teams throughout the facility's history. Starting in 1946, when the Los Angeles Rams relocated from Cleveland to LA to become the first professional sporting team on the West Coast. Okay. The Rams would enjoy a very successful time on the West Coast, and they would develop huge rivalries throughout the years, including the San Francisco 49ers, Chicago Bears, and the Dallas Cowboys, being amongst some of the Rams' most fiercest rivals in the NFL. The Rams enjoyed their time in the Coliseum until the 1970s, when the NFL they instituted a controversial blackout rule in 1973, which basically states that games must be sold out no later than 72 hours prior to kickoff in order for the games to be televised within 75 miles of that facility. So when it came to the Rams and their home games, Rams basically had to sell out within 72 hours prior to kickoff. Otherwise, the Los Angeles metro area and any other TV market within 75 miles of the LA Coliseum would not have access to LA Rams games on television. Okay? This was back in the day when the Coliseum had a capacity, okay? Throughout a majority of the Coliseum's history, it had a capacity of 90,000 upward. And there were times where the capacity was over 100,000, making it the largest, if not one of the largest facilities in all of the National Football League. Okay? The Rams had a hard time selling out because of its large capacities, and despite its successful years and having a winning product on the field, they still had trouble selling out. So by the late 70s, then Rams owner Carroll Rosenblum basically started looking at a smaller facility for the Rams. He wound up signing a deal with Anaheim Stadium, which was host to the California Angels Major League Baseball team, to renovate the stadium and enclose it in order to accommodate NFL football. The renovations would be done in time for the 1980 season, in which the Rams would basically leave the Coliseum after the 79 season and play in Anaheim. The original lease at Anaheim Stadium was for 30 years, which would take them through the end of the 2009 season, with an out clause halfway through, which would be at the end of the 1994 season. Do keep all this in mind when we are going through the history, shall we? Okay? And also, at the end of the 1979 was a very interesting year for the Rams. Carroll Rosenblum died in the drowning incident. The team, for tax purposes, Carroll left the team to his wife, Georgia Frontier, one of the first female owners of all of professional sports. The Rams miraculously found themselves in the Super Bowl that year. Super Bowl 14 at the Rose Bowl, where they wind up playing defending Super Bowl champion Pittsburgh Steelers and Terry Bradshaw for the right to be the world champions. The Rams put up a good fight in that Super Bowl, but it was the Steelers in the fourth quarter that put the Steelers over the top and gave them their fourth Super Bowl during the 1970s and their last Super Bowl title for 26 years, until 2006, when they would defeat the Seahawks in Super Bowl 40. Rams would not go back to the Super Bowl for another 20 years in the infamous Greatest Show on Turf, Super Bowl 34, where they beat the Tennessee Titans at the last minute. Okay? So shortly after the Rams left for Anaheim, the Coliseum was in look for a new tenant. They were upset that the Rams had left. And they wind up getting tapped by the Oakland Raiders. They tried to, Al Davis, the owner of the Oakland Raiders, had tried to get some renovations done to Oakland Stadium, including some luxury suites. Let me see if I can go back to my notes here. Okay. Al Davis, he attempted to get some improvements made to the Coliseum, specifically addition of luxury boxes, which he was unable to do. So on March 1st, 1980, Al Davis signed a memorandum of agreement to move the Raiders from Oakland to Los Angeles. However, the move was relocation of any kind requires 3/4 majority of the league owners. This potential move was automatically shot down by the owners. 22 no owners 0 approving, 22 shooting it down, and 5 abstaining. Al basically tried, oh fuck you, we're gonna move anyway. It was blocked by an injunction, and in response, the Raiders and the Coliseum both slapped the NFL with antitrust lawsuits. Okay, and the Coliseum was heavily on the Raiders' side after it had just losing the Rams to Anaheim. Okay, by 1982, the lawsuits were settled after the jury ruled in favor of Davis and the Coliseum, clearing the Raiders' relocation to Los Angeles. Raiders would relocate to LA for the 82 season, playing their home games at the Coliseum. Shortly after their move, the Raiders they wind up having huge success along the way. The first season in LA was shortened due to an NFL strike, with an 8-1 record. however losing to the second round to the New York Jets. Following year, the Raiders finished 12-4 overall, beating the Steelers and the Seahawks in the playoffs, and also beating the Washington Redskins in Super Bowl 18 in Tampa, which gave the Raiders their third and most recent NFL championship. The Raiders would also have another successful season in 1984, but they would wind up losing in the wild card to the Seattle Seahawks. Okay? Their first 2 years at the Coliseum it was like a honeymoon. It was success, it was bliss. But by the mid 1980s, the Raiders started to struggle. Okay? And they basically were not too happy with their home in the Coliseum. Okay? To start things off, ABC and Monday Night Football, ABC, who televised Monday Night Football, they refused to televise Raiders games. Okay? They refused to televise the Raiders at home for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Coliseum had a capacity of about 100,000 people at the time, and despite the Raiders' successful years, they still had a hard time selling out. And they were subject to the NFL blackout rules. These NFL blackout rules, you might add, okay, they were stupid, but they were pretty much put in place in an effort to encourage attendance at these games. The NFL did not like seeing empty seats in the stadium, and they were afraid, why would I spend money to go to the game when I can watch it on TV for free? Okay? So the NFL basically says, like, the only way we're going to televise this in the local market is if you sell out. You sell out, we'll televise it you can watch it at home. All right? But basically, they were subject to these blackout rules, which would basically, if they were to televise the Raiders at the Coliseum, LA would be blacked out from Monday Night Football. Another reason is, by the mid-'80s, the neighborhoods surrounding the LA Coliseum were very dangerous, all right, and were not a safe place to be, especially after dark. And ABC did not feel safe televising Raiders games in this facility. Another thing, Raiders quickly became affiliated with, because they were an LA team, they became quickly affiliated with hip hop and the gangster community. And that affiliation made Raiders games even more unsafe to go to. Tailgating by itself. You had fans tailgating, playing hardcore football on the concrete parking lot. Okay? Plus, it basically got to a point where, like, typical fans saying, we don't feel safe going to the Coliseum. They basically find every reason possible to stay away. Okay? The team's performance also started to fall apart as well. And by 1986, the Raiders basically experienced their first back-to-back losing seasons since the early 1960s, prior to joining the NFL, of course. Okay? From 86 to 89, the Raiders would not finish any better than 8-8, and Al Davis basically started getting into feuds with Marcus Allen, and retaliated by signing Bo Jackson, who was also playing Major League Baseball. Okay. Al Davis, as early as 1986, began seeking a new modern stadium away from the Coliseum and the dangerous neighborhoods that surrounded it at the time. In addition to sharing a venue with USC, the Coliseum was aging and still lacked the luxury suites and other amenities that Al Davis was promised when he moved to Raiders to LA. Coliseum had 100,000 seats and was rarely able to fill all of them, so most of the Raider games were blacked out on television. Okay? When the Rams relocated to Anaheim, they basically had The Rams wind up experiencing huge success, and they basically, and even though they did have some blackouts, they were having a much better time selling out than the Raiders. In 1987, the Raiders were contacted by the city of Irwindale for a prospective stadium site and put up a $10 million good faith deposit for the proposal. The bid failed, and Davis kept the money. And Davis was also, at the time, negotiating deals to relocate the Raiders to either Oakland or Sacramento. Okay? But eventually signed a continuous lease with the LA Coliseum in an effort to try to make things right. Okay? By the early 90s, things started getting pretty bad. And the honeymoon by this point was officially over. Okay? Aside from the dangerous neighborhood, the LA riots, the Rodney King verdict, the LA Raiders affiliation with the gangster community, the dangerous rowdiness of the cheap seats of the Raiders games at the Coliseum, it basically things started to fall apart. Okay, they only made 2 appearances in the playoffs during the 1990s, including an AFC Championship matchup in 1991 against the Buffalo Bills, which the Bills won and wound up going to the Super Bowl. Okay. By the end of the 1994 season, the future of the NFL in Los Angeles was in serious jeopardy. Okay. Final game of the season was played December 24th, 1994. The Rams hosting the Washington Redskins in Anaheim, followed by the Raiders hosting the Kansas City Chiefs at the Coliseum. Both the Rams and Raiders would lose their season finales, and both of them would have their respective games blacked out due to poor attendance. By 1994, everybody knew that the Rams were going to be gone. The Rams were approaching the halfway point of their 30-year lease. Georgia Frontier did not want to stay in Southern California, and Anaheim was not able to help with a new stadium proposal, being in an economic recession themselves. The final game of the LA Rams in Anaheim had a capacity. Okay, the stadium held about 75,000, with only 23,000 in attendance. So roughly 2 out of every 3 seats in Anaheim Stadium during their final game were empty, and most of the fans that were there were either the few fans of the Redskins or die-hard Rams fans who were there to say their last goodbyes after all their years. While over at the Coliseum, nobody knew whether or not the Raiders were going to stay in LA for the next year or not. Okay? 1995, everything came to a halt, starting with the Rams. They began looking at relocation. First with Hartford, Connecticut, because around the same time, the Patriots were looking to relocate out of Foxborough, Massachusetts. And the Rams decided to take advantage of it by relocating to Hartford. Hartford, Connecticut, that is. Okay. However, the Patriots' relocation it wound up falling through, and they wound up stuck at Foxborough Stadium and getting sold to its stadium owner, Robert Kraft, who owned Foxborough Stadium. And they basically came up to the Rams and said, "This is our territory. You can't move here. Get lost." Then they decided to look at Baltimore, Maryland, who had lost the Colts 10 years prior. Baltimore, well, that got shot down too. Then St. Louis came knocking on on the Rams' door. Georgia, being a native Missouri resident herself, saw this as an opportunity to relocate back to her native land. while taking the Rams with her. St. Louis, who had lost the Cardinals after the '87 season, were trying to find a way to get an NFL team back into St. Louis. And basically, um, they had an indoor dome stadium that was just about ready to be finished later that year. And they offered Georgia and the Rams, okay, a lease in that stadium. She basically had her heart set on moving to St. Louis. But the NFL owners kept shooting her down, criticizing that she had purposely mismanaged the team and tried to sabotage it. They found they were trying to find a way to keep the NFL in Los Angeles, and they were trying to find a way to get her to sell. But Georgia fought back, and with the potential of an antitrust lawsuit. And having lost an antitrust lawsuit to the Raiders the previous decade, they didn't want to fall into the same trap. So, in April of 1995, just enough owners gave the Rams the approval to relocate to St. Louis. And after the vote, the NFL Board of Directors were going to do everything they possibly could to keep the Raiders in LA and the NFL as well. Okay? So in May 1995, after the Rams departed for St. Louis, the owners of the NFL approved with a vote of 27-1 a resolution supporting a plan to build a $200 million privately financed stadium on the property owned by Hollywood Park in Inglewood for the Raiders. The stadium would have also been the home of the UCLA Bruins football. It would open in 1997, and it would have been guaranteed at least 2 Super Bowls. Okay? However, it came with a catch. In order for Al Davis to sign on, he was going to be required to take it. The NFL was planning on creating an NFC expansion team to replace the Rams, and Al Davis was going to be forced to take that NFC team in with him. Al Davis wanted to be by himself. Yes, he was going to get what he wanted. He was going to get the state-of-the-art stadium and the luxury suites and all those amenities that he had been dying for. But it was going to come at a cost of having to share it with another team. When the truth is, Al Davis wanted to be by himself. So at the last minute, Al Davis said, "Fuck you, I'm going back to Oakland." So in June of 1995, the Raiders signed a long-term lease to return home to the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum. And that move right there left Los Angeles for the first time since the end of World War II without a football team. And the NFL would remain absent from LA for about 20 years. Many proposals had come and gone over the years. Okay? On the NFL's return to LA. However, none of them became a reality. One of them had the Seahawks moving their team equipment into a storage facility in Orange County, where they were going to play at Anaheim Stadium, in a protest for not wanting to play anymore in the Kingdome. And that tactic right there got Seattle to basically, it not only got blocked by the NFL, but Seattle woke up and says, okay, we'll build you a new stadium. Just get your crap back here already. Okay? So that's how they got Central League Field. Okay? In 1999, the NFL brought back the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns shortly they wound up relocating to Baltimore, becoming the Baltimore Ravens. And they wound up building, in Cleveland, wound up building a brand new stadium. And after that stadium got built, the NFL approved the Browns as another team for the Cleveland Browns. But they would not be able to play until the stadium's opening in 1999. That basically it created 31 teams for the NFL, and they were basically wanting to create a 32-second team in order to even out the league. And along with it, they were planning on doing a major divisional restructure. Okay, so basically you had um, since LA, okay, they took a look at the markets who had called the NFL home that it had since abandoned. There are only two cities on the list: LA and Houston. And since LA had gone the longest, LA was given first pick at that NFL expansion team, where you had multiple groups bidding against each other, not willing to cooperate with one another. And when the NFL saw this was not going anywhere, Houston jumped out of nowhere with a clear bid and a more aggressive push, having been pissed off of losing the Oilers a few years prior. Because Houston had a more organized plan and they were more aggressive about the NFL, Houston got the 32nd franchise. And Los Angeles was left out in the cold. Okay. During the 2010s, the NFL's return to Los Angeles became a huge topic. Especially when you had as many as 8 teams in the league having stadium issues, and many of them desiring relocation to LA if they couldn't get their situation straightened out. At the end of the day, by the mid 2010s came around, there were 3 teams left in the running: the Rams, Chargers, and the Raiders. All of which who had called the Coliseum LA home at one point or another. And might I add, 1960, the Chargers, when they played in the LA Coliseum for 1 year, they were part of the American Football League, which wind up merging in with the NFL. Okay, they played at the Coliseum for 1 year before moving to San Diego. Okay, and they were having problems down there themselves. So at the end, one day after the 2015 NFL season came to an end, or the regular season that is, Rams, Chargers, and Raiders all filed for relocation to Los Angeles. And Roger Goodell, commissioner of the NFL, basically held a closed door meeting with its owners on what they were going to do. The following week, they held a secret ballot, and after the vote, this is what they came up with. They approved the Rams' relocation back to Los Angeles, effective immediately, where they would play for the 2016. They would play in LA in time for the 2016 season. They were also given the green light for their stadium that they had planned to build at Hollywood Park, which would eventually become SoFi Stadium. Okay, the Rams had to find a temporary home where they were going to, as part of the relocation criteria, the Rams had to find a temporary home while their new permanent home was under construction. And this is where the Coliseum comes into play. The Rams were moving back into the LA Coliseum for the first time since 1979, and they were supposed to play 3 years in the Coliseum. It turned into a 4th year when SoFi was experiencing difficulties early on in the construction. LA was experiencing a heavier rainfall than normal, and they were having some construction issues. And they wanted to get things done right. So the stadium construction was pushed off by 1 year. SoFi Stadium was originally supposed to host Super Bowl 55, the earliest year that it was eligible to do so. And it was their 2nd year in operation. But that delay in construction basically made Super Bowl 55 ineligible for SoFi. So Super Bowl 55 was relocated to Tampa, and the Rams were awarded, and SoFi Stadium was awarded Super Bowl 56 in return. So the Rams wind up playing in the LA Coliseum for 4 years before moving into their permanent home. Okay. Meanwhile, the Chargers were given the 2016 season to straighten things out with San Diego, and if they couldn't straighten it out by then they could apply for relocation within this grace period. Just at the very last second, Chargers announced they were moving to Los Angeles, which basically shut the Raiders out of the LA market. The Raiders, being upset, they didn't walk away empty-handed though. They wind up relocating to Las Vegas in time for the 2020 season, when Allegiant Stadium would be up and running. Okay. The National Football League would also host its infamous Pro Bowl game, which is the All-Star game for the NFL, and it played there for quite a while. All right. And those of you wondering how long did they wind up getting played for, let's see. Coliseum became the permanent home of the Pro Bowl from 1951 to 1972, and it would also host the Pro Bowl again in 1979. After the 79 season, the Pro Bowl wound up playing the next 30 years in Aloha Stadium out in Hawaii. Okay? And it wound up rotating amongst other facilities here and there. As of right, the next Pro Bowl in 2024 is supposed to be held at Camping World Stadium in Orlando. Okay? So, while we are on track of the National Football League, we're moving on to our next topic. And it'll be a smaller one, might I add. The Super Bowl. Okay? Los Angeles has hosted 8 Super Bowls during its history. And had it not been for the NFL's absence in LA from 1995 through 2015, chances are LA would have hosted at least 12 or 13 Super Bowls by now. Okay? The most recent Super Bowl was held in Super Bowl 56 in SoFi Stadium, featuring the Rams and the Bengals. The Rose Bowl Stadium in Pasadena had the honors of hosting 5 Super Bowls between 1977 and 1993, with its latest Super Bowl, Super Bowl 27, featuring the Buffalo Bills and the Dallas Cowboys. That Super Bowl was not originally awarded to LA, but was originally awarded to Arizona. And the NFL took it away after Arizona had a controversy regarding its honoring of a newly federal holiday called Martin Luther King Day. It was made a federal holiday in 1986, but by 1991, Arizona is one of the few states yet to recognize it as a holiday. And the governor refused to honor it, citing financial reasons. And that wound up causing huge controversy and many boycotts in the process. And the NFL, who was supposed to be hosting the Super Bowl, was a huge target with that. So the NFL took Super Bowl 27 away from Arizona and gave it to the Rose Bowl, who was the only facility that was willing to take on the Super Bowl in such a short period amount of time. Usually Super Bowls are awarded a couple of years in advance. Not just 2 years, but they're usually awarded at least 4 or 5 years in advance. And it takes time to put it together. And the Rose Bowl was the only one that was actually willing to put it together. The other 2 Super Bowls, we go back earlier, were actually hosted at the LA Coliseum. So the Coliseum had the honors of hosting 2 Super Bowls out of the 8 that were hosted in Los Angeles. The first one was the first ever Super Bowl, which was at the time was called the NFL AFL World Championship game. And it featured the Green Bay Packers and the Kansas City Chiefs. Okay? So let's talk about Why don't we talk about that, shall we? Wait a second, I don't need this anymore. Okay. The AFL NFL Championship game. So it was held at the Coliseum with a capacity with an attendance of 61,946. Packers would defeat the Kansas City Chiefs 35-10. Okay. Tickets for the first ever Super Bowl were priced at 12, 10, and $6. All right, depending on where you're going to sit. It is the only Super Bowl where the numeric yard markers were 5 yards apart rather than 10 as it is customary. In 1972, marking yard lines ending in 5 were disallowed in the NFL in order to standardize field markings. It's also the last professional gridiron game ever played with a double support goalpost. Okay. The game was televised on both CBS and NBC. CBS, who had the rights to the NFL, and NBC, who had the rights to the AFL. All right. However, all known broadcast tapes of this game in its entirety are known to be are unfortunately lost or erased by both NBC and CBS to save costs. Common practice in the TV industry at the time, as videotapes were very expensive. Okay. It prevented studies comparing each network's respective telecasts. Okay. So, as of the only footage that is known to survive of this first ever Super Bowl is from NFL Films, who were also on site, broadcasting from every angle. And they wound up producing a 30-minute documentary commemorating the key moments of that first Super Bowl. Super Bowl halftime in 1967 didn't feature major artists like it did today. It was college marching bands, including Grambling State and the University of Arizona. Okay? And I do believe that the University of Arizona does have actual video footage of their performance at the Super Bowl halftime show. It's only a matter of where it's located and whether or not it's accessible to the public. Okay? U of A, if you're watching, make it public. That's what YouTube is for, you dipshits. Okay? So, the LA Ramettes, who were the cheerleaders for the Rams games, entertained pregame festivities. University of Arizona Marching Band created a physical outline of the continental United States at the center of the field, which is what they always do during the pregame at the U of A home games. And we also had Anaheim High School placing banners of each NFL and AFL team at each team's geographical location. Okay. U of A and Grambling College both performed the halftime that year. Okay. So, the other Super Bowl that was hosted at the Coliseum and the most recent was Super Bowl 7 on January 14th, 1973, and it was also a memorable one as well, featuring the Miami Dolphins and the Washington Redskins. Okay. The Miami Dolphins, okay, wind up beating the Redskins 14-7, which gave the Dolphins the only perfect season to date. And of course, by this point, the Super Bowl was more well known and was more organized to what it is today. Okay, it became a much bigger spectacular than the first one. So, as a result, the attendance went from 60 something thousand up to 90,182, and even the halftime show got a little more interesting, where you not only had the Michigan marching band, but you also had Woody Herman and Andy Williams for halftime entertainment as well. Pretty interesting, right? All right. So now that we're done with the NFL, let's talk about the Summer Olympics. Da 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 da. This is probably the other than USC football. This is probably the other major event that is well known for the Coliseum. Okay, so the United States has hosted as of 2023. The United States has hosted a total of 4 Summer Olympics. 2 of those were hosted by LA, and both of those had their opening and closing ceremonies held at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, with the cauldron lit on top of where the existing cauldron where it is today was built specifically for the 1932 Olympics and reused for the 84 games. And the Coliseum was also home to most of the track and field events in the process. The Summer Olympics will also be hosted a third time in 2028. Okay? In 2017, Paris and Los Angeles were both competing against each other for the 2024 Summer Olympics. Paris and LA were the only two to submit bids for the 2024 games, and no cities had yet come forward for a bid on the 2028 Olympics. So the IOC the International Olympic Committee was scared that there wasn't going to be anybody coming forward. So they wind up holding a closed door meeting, and they basically decided they decided to hold a vote between the two. Whoever did not receive the 2024 games would automatically receive the 2028 Olympics. So when the games are awarded in 2028, it'll be the third time that LA would host their games, the first in 44 years, and also the 5th time in U.S. history, with the first being hosted in the U.S. in 32 years, with the most recent being the 1996 games in Atlanta. And it'll also be the third games to be held at the Coliseum. The opening and closing ceremonies for the 2028 games we don't really know much of the details, but rumor has it that the Coliseum and SoFi are both going to be co-hosting both the opening and closing ceremonies together, while the Coliseum will focus on the track and field events, and SoFi will focus on the soccer, particularly the finals. Okay? So let's talk about Alright. So let's talk about the 1932 Summer Games. So the Coliseum hosted the games for the first time in 1932. Basically served as a site for field hockey, gymnastics, show jumping, and track and field events. It also marked the introduction of the Olympic Village as well as the Victory Podium. Okay? So LA would they would bid for the Olympics consistently from World War II through the 1980s. In 1960, they lost to Rome. 1964, they lost to Tokyo. 1968 to Mexico City. 1972 to Munich. 1976 to Montreal. 1980 to Moscow. And 1984. And they basically were originally competing against Tehran, but right before the IOC was able to hold the vote, Tehran backed out of the running amid political turmoil that was rising in the country. Okay, so the 84 games basically were held from July 28th to August 12th of 1984. The day before, the Coliseum was made a National Historic Landmark. Okay, California was the home of the incumbent U.S. President Ronald Reagan, who officially opened the games. They were also the first summer games under the IOC presidency of Juan Antonio Samaranch. Now, the one issue about the 84 games was that the games were boycotted by a total of 14 Eastern Bloc countries, including the Soviet Union and Eastern Germany, and they boycotted the 84 games in retaliation of the U.S.-led boycott of the 1980 Summer Games in Moscow, where we protested the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan the year before. Romania was the only Soviet bloc state that opted to attend the games. Okay, so let's go to the 1932. In addition to the LA hosting the Summer Games, Lake Placid in New York winded up. Lake Placid in New York wound up hosting the Winter Games earlier that year. Okay, so the 1932 games. Let's take a look. See if we have United States hosting nation. We won a total of 103 medals, 41 gold, 32 silver, and 30 bronze. Italy came next, followed by France, Sweden, Japan, Hungary, Finland, Great Britain, Germany, and Australia. Okay. Going back to the 1984 games, okay, we have the medal count. Okay. The top 10 countries. The United States was number one with a record 174 medals, including 83 gold, 61 silver, and 30 bronze. And the other countries in order that won the most medals at the 84 games include Romania, West Germany, China, Italy, Canada, Japan, New Zealand, Yugoslavia, and South Korea. Okay. So that was 84 in a nutshell. So by 1984, like, nobody was wanting to basically host the Summer Games because of security and financial reasons. The 1976 games basically were at 1972 games in Munich saw the PLO invade the Olympic Village and take out the Israeli Olympic team. 1976 in Montreal saw huge financial burdens where they wound up going way over budget, and the Olympic Stadium that was built was not fully paid off until 2008, more than 3 decades after its construction. Okay, LA basically changed the tone. Their bid for the 84 Summer Olympics was basically, we're going to use existing facilities, and anything that has to be built is going to be through private sponsorship. There are like 2 or 3 facilities that had to be built. All of them were privately funded by either 7-Eleven or McDonald's. And speaking of which, they wind up receiving, LA received a shitload of corporate sponsorship in order to help execute the 84 games. And the games turned out to be a huge profit making machine. And it basically sparked huge interest for future Olympics. So by the time you started seeing the bidding for the 1992 and 96 and 2000 Olympics, you started having a whole bunch of cities popping out bids left and right. Okay. 2028 will be the next time that the Olympics will be held, and it's going to be very exciting to see how that one turns out. Of course, I wasn't alive in 84, so I don't remember, so I don't know anything about the 84 Olympics. But hopefully, it'll be a huge success. Okay. Now, the Coliseum is widely huge, and basically you've seen a wide variety of different events being held. But one of the most bizarre is Major League Baseball, and the home of the LA Dodgers is the next topic. 1957, after 70 years, the Brooklyn Dodgers announced they were going to be relocating to Los Angeles. They wanted to build a new stadium in New York Robert Moses, a city planner, basically says they basically rejected the manners, and the Dodgers begins to play some of their games out of state as basically a way to try to them to build the Dodgers a new stadium. Meanwhile, LA was expressing interest in with airplanes now being a huge method of transportation. Like up until World War II, like airplanes were not accessible for traveling across country because they were all being used for the war. And the fastest method of transportation to get from one city to another was basically by train. And by going train across, it would take a day or two just to travel from New York to LA, as opposed to a couple of hours by plane. By the end of World War II, you basically started seeing a huge surplus. Okay, it, travel by air became more open and accessible, and it basically opened the doors of moving professional sporting teams. Many cities out west, particularly Los Angeles, were expressing interest in hosting in having professional sporting teams of their own. And they basically contacted the Dodgers. The Dodgers, when hearing that LA was interested, they came knocking on LA's door saying, "We want to move out too." So when LA decided to take the Dodgers from Brooklyn out to Los Angeles, the New York Giants Major League Baseball team, they wanted they wound up moving out to San Francisco shortly afterwards in an effort to keep that rivalry between each other active. Okay? So it's not just like a West Coast rivalry, but it dates back to their time in New York. Well, at least 130, 140 years ago. Okay? By the time when the Dodgers moved out to LA, they basically didn't have. They were in the process of trying to build a new stadium, and they didn't have anywhere to go. So the only facility that was basically anywhere close to hosting the Dodgers was the LA Coliseum, and it was so awkward. Like you had like the seating and the field positions were extremely awkward in the process. Okay. Meanwhile, the Dodgers were having a little bit of trouble trying to secure um, access to a new stadium. They basically part of the thing that basically attracted the Dodgers out to LA is that the people that contacted the Dodgers, they basically said that O'Malley, who was the owner of the Dodgers, would basically have full ownership of that stadium, and he would get to pocket all of the extra money that the stadium owners would get to have. So the land would be sold to O'Malley, and he would get to have full ownership not only of the team but the stadium as a whole. Okay, so the Dodgers. Okay, um, so basically there was a there was a there was a piece of land in LA in Chavez Ravine is what they were going to build it. Okay, there was a housing project they were going to build. LA basically seized all these houses via eminent domain in an effort to build this very controversial housing project called Chavez Ravine. It would be like public housing, huge towers and stuff, school, a college, and everything that like kind of stuff you would see in the you would see in Brooklyn and Queens and stuff like that. However, interest in the project dwindled by the public after they realized that it basically had socialist ideals attached to it. So the, the the housing project fell through, and the property was sold over to O'Malley, which he wound up building Dodger Stadium in its place. Okay, they wind up playing. Meanwhile, the Dodgers wind up playing. Um, they were the first ever Major League Baseball team to play in Los Angeles. First ever game was April 18th, 1958, where they defeated the former New York and now San Francisco Giants 6-5 before an attendance of 78,672 at the Coliseum. Okay, Dodger Stadium officially opened in time for opening day 1962. With its clean, simple lines and its picturesque setting, Emmett Hills and palm trees, the ballpark quickly became an icon of the Dodgers and their new California lifestyle. O'Malley was determined that there would not be a bad seat in the house, achieving this by cantilevered grandstands that have since been widely imitated. More importantly for this team, the stadium's spacious dimensions, along with other factors, gave defense an advantage over offense, and the Dodgers moved to take advantage of this by assembling a team that would excel with its pitching. Since moving to LA, the Dodgers have won 12 more national championships and 6 World Series rings. Okay? Okay. So after the 1961 season, they moved into their new stadium, Dodger Stadium. Okay. Talk about attendance now in the Coliseum. Okay. Capacity in the Coliseum has fluctuated over the years. Okay. Hitting as high as over. Okay. There is a capacity. Okay. Average capacity would be around 90 to 100,000, and sometimes surpassing that. So we're going to be taking a look at some of the attendance events. So for those of you wondering, let's see. Today, the Coliseum has a capacity. There was a its capacity pre-2018 was 93,607. However, it has since been, due to recent renovations, it has been reduced to 77,500. And it was largely in part due to a 2-year-long major renovation of the stadium, replacing the seating along with the addition of luxury boxes and club suites, many of which Al Davis had tried to get over the years but never got. Costing $315 million, it was funded solely by the University of Southern California and managed by architectural firm DR Group. And it was the first major upgrade to the stadium in 20 years. Okay? So as of right now, the stadium holds a capacity of 77,500. However, there are some major attendance. Let's see if I can actually get my hands on that. All right, here we go. First up, you have the 1940. USC and Notre Dame have an annual rivalry with each other. One of the most historical and one of the greatest rivalries in all of college football, dating back to 1926. Okay, I should talk a little bit about this rivalry because it does have a huge impact on the Coliseum, and it's basically the highest rated sporting event in Coliseum history. So, Notre Dame and USC, they basically, it's primarily played between the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and the University of Southern California Trojans. Customarily played on the Saturday. It's customary played on the Saturday morning, Thanksgiving Day. It's customary played on the Saturday following Thanksgiving when the game is played in LA, or on the second or third Saturday of October when the game is played in South Bend, Indiana. This rivalry dates back to 1926 and is considered one of the fiercest in college football. The rivalry game has been played every year from 1926 to the present, with the exception of 1943 to 45 for World War II and 2020 when the Pac-12 canceled all non-conference games in response to that phony COVID pandemic. Okay, it interrupted that stupid pandemic. Interrupted a streak of 73 consecutive years in which this rivalry had been played. 2021 matchup marked the first time in the series history that 2 consecutive games between the rivals were played in South Bend. Okay, so South Bend usually hosts the rivalry on the odd number years, and USC hosts the rivalry on the even number years. Okay, the significance of the significance behind this rivalry is as follows. It has been amongst the most successful. These are some of the most successful programs in college football, with the schools having won a combined 24 national championships, 14 Heisman trophies throughout the 2021 up until the 2024 season. Moreover, both schools have fielded a high number of consensus All-Americans, which are 102 for Notre Dame, the most in college football, and 82 for USC. College Football Hall of Famers, 46 for Notre Dame and 43 for USC. Pro Football Hall of Famers, 13 each. The rivals account for the highest number of players drafted into the NFL draft out of any school. Notre Dame has had 546 players taken compared to just 530 for USC. No rivalry in college football accounts for as many combined honors. Okay? Overall, these two have played 93 times in school and program history, or these in college football history. Notre Dame and USC have played a total of 93 times. Notre Dame leads the rivalry, 48 to 37 to 5. Largest victory in this rivalry is 1966 when Notre Dame shut out the Trojans 51 to nothing at the Coliseum. Longest winning streak, Notre Dame, who had won 11 in a row from 1983 to 1993, and the longest unbeaten streak is 13 set by Notre Dame from 1983 to 1995. And of course, that 1994 matchup was evidently a tie. Okay. Okay. So these two play for this special trophy called the Jeweled Shillelagh. Please, my apologies if I mispronounce that. Shilahi, okay? The Jeweled Shilahi. Trophy awarded to the winner of the annual Notre Dame USC rivalry game. The Shilahi, an Irish club made of an oak or blackthorn saplings from Ireland. On the end of the club is engraved the following: from the Emerald Isle. Trophy was introduced in 1952 to commemorate the first game of the series played on December 4th, 1926. Trophy was donated by the Notre Dame Alumni Club of Los Angeles, stating that this Shilahi will serve to symbolize in part the high tradition, the keen rivalry, and above all, the sincere respect which these two great universities have for each other. Okay? Going back to this, the 1947 matchup between these two saw the USC wound up hosting Notre Dame in this particular matchup with a capacity of 104,953, the highest attendance for a football game at the Coliseum. Fighting Irish would defeat the Trojans and would go on to win the national championship that year. Okay, that score was, we said 1947, right? Yeah. It was 38 to 7, Notre Dame. Okay. The World Series. Okay, highest attended 19 during the 1959 World Series against the Chicago White Sox. Attendance at all three Dodgers games exceeded 90,000 people. Game 5 drew 92,706 fans, a World Series record that will likely remain unbroken. And for those of you wondering, how did the Dodgers do that year? They beat the White Sox 4-2. August 6, 2006, the Coliseum hosted an international doubleheader featuring Chivas USA and the New England Revolution and Chivas de Guadalajara of Mexico versus FC Barcelona of Spain, the reigning Spanish and European champions, respectively. According to Major League Soccer, the standing room only crowd of 92,650 fans was the largest in Major League Soccer history and the largest to witness a professional club soccer event in the U.S. Okay, March 29th, 2008. The LA Dodgers were celebrating their 50th anniversary in LA by playing an exhibition game against the Boston Red Sox, which the Dodgers lost 7, which the Boston Red Sox beat the Dodgers 7-4. The crowd of 115,300 set a new Guinness World Record for attendance at a baseball game. But the all-time record, it has nothing to do with sports. It is the 1963 Billy Graham Southern California Crusade. All right? Billy Graham was a very famous. Okay. Let's go to this. Okay. And of course, we'll talk about this in a moment. So let's see. All right. Billy Graham was one of the most influential Christian leaders who became internationally recognized in the late 1940s. Reverend Graham hosted crusades across 185 countries over 58 years, and his lifetime audience, including radio broadcasts, topped 2 billion with a B. Okay? His crusade at the LA Coliseum was hosted from August 15th through September 8th of 1963, where the LA community and beyond came to the LA Memorial Coliseum to listen to the religious teachings of Reverend Billy Graham. Nearly a million people, 927,000, came to the Coliseum during these several weeks. On the final day of the Crusades, 134,254 people filled the seats of the Coliseum, and an additional 20,000 were estimated to have listened on loudspeakers in Exposition Park, making this the highest attended event in LA Memorial Coliseum history. And this is a feat that will never be broken. Okay? Sports are not the only major thing to have been hosted at the Coliseum over the years. And I'll be more than happy to go through a list of them. Some of them concerts, some of them religious crusades, some of them political. Allow me to demonstrate, okay? So we have the order. September 11th, 1943, the Army Ordnance and Action Show was a 2-day free event spread out over Exposition Park, brought in a crowd of almost 200,000 people. For the audience, it was just a show, but for the soldiers, it was a training course that would help them enhance their skills for battle in World War II. The crowd was able to see Army soldiers showcasing real-life exhibits, hosting a variety of different events that included aquatic warfare in a burning oil field pool, first aid demonstrations, motorcycle and tank recovery drills, a simulated battle inside the stadium, and live ammo artillery exhibitions. Okay. It's April 3rd, 1946. LA Memorial Coliseum welcomes the Thrill Circus. So basically, Lieutenant Dick Ryan International Rodeo and Thrill Circus came to visit the Coliseum, a combination rodeo, circus, and stunt show. This event also included midget and motorbike demonstrations, was planned to bring to the people the real spirit of the Old West in actions, thrills, cowboys, and horses. A portion of the proceeds went towards rehabilitating blinded servicemen. 32,025 people attended this event. September 6, 1946, LA Rams versus the Washington Redskins. First professional football game hosted in the LA Metro, hosted in Southern California and on the West Coast, with an attendance of 68,000 and $100,000 raised for charity. April 15th, 1947, Jackie Robinson makes his debut with the LA Dodgers. Okay? First African American to play Major League Baseball. He coincidentally happened to play for the LA Dodgers, carrying the number 42. Actually, it was the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947, but it was later. Okay. But in 1962, after the Dodgers had relocated to Los Angeles, Robinson got inducted into the Hall of Fame, and in 1984 he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He was also a student athlete at UCLA. and that's another part of the LA tradition when it comes into play here. In 1997, Major League Baseball retired his number 42, and in 2005, Robinson was forever memorized as part of the Coliseum's legacy with a plaque in the Court of Honor. Okay, we already covered that one. 1960, July 15th, John F. Kennedy, Senator of Massachusetts and candidate for President of the United States, he accepts the nomination for the Democratic Party in the 1960 presidential election. Okay, his running mate was Texas Senator Lyndon Johnson, and his memorable speech became known as the New Frontier. In JFK's speech, he famously said, "The new frontier of which I speak is not a set of promises, it is a set of challenges. It sums up not what I intend to offer to the American people, but what I intend to ask of them." Okay? Kennedy's campaign was based on the separation of church and state, as well as an effort to regain the support of black voters who had been voting Republican for the last century after the Republicans supported the end of slavery. The convention was one of the many key moments in the Coliseum history for the community to interact with political figures. Okay? August 6, 1960, the American Football League, the LA Chargers of the American Football League take on the New York Titans. All right? The crowd was basically 27,778, with the Chargers winning 27-7. Nearly 57 years later, the team was announced that they will be playing the 2017 season at the StubHub Center in Carson. So, after the 1960 season, the Chargers relocated to San Diego. They merged into the National Football League by the end of the decade, and they winded up relocating to LA in 2017, where they wind up playing in the StubHub Center in Carson, followed by secondary tenants in SoFi Stadium, where they pay the Rams $1 to play each year in SoFi. Okay. You have the Billy Graham Crusade. 1963. Billy Graham hosts his religious crusade in the LA Coliseum with 134,254 filling the seats in the last night of the event. May 1964, Martin Luther King Jr. speaks at the Human Dignitary event at the Coliseum with, basically had an attendance of 14,893 supporters and many members of the Hollywood committee, including Dick Van Dyke. Dr. King addressed many topics such as the Civil Rights Act, which at the time was being stalled by the U.S. Senate. Just 19 days after this event, President Lyndon Johnson broke the stalemate in the Senate, and the Civil Rights Act was passed into law on July 2, 1964. January 15, 1967, first ever Super Bowl hosted at the LA Coliseum. Martin Luther King Memorial on April 7, 1968, they basically 16,000 people came to pay their respects to MLK, who was assassinated a few days prior. July 8, 1972, Super Bowl of Motocross. Motocross basically takes over the Coliseum with a capacity of 29,290 people. August 20th, 1972, Wattstax 72 benefit concert. It was touted as the Black Woodstock, and it brought in over 100,000 local attendees and celebrated African American culture, unity, and pride within the community. Featured in the event includes Jesse Jackson and performances by recording artist Isaiah Hayes, Staples Singers, King Weston, Rufus Thomas, and the Soul Children. February 18th, 1973, Evel Knievel sets a record at the Coliseum, where he successfully, in front of 35,000 people, successfully leaps over 50 crushed cars on the field. It would provide Knievel with his largest audience to date, including television coverage on ABC's Wide World of Sports. November 30th, 1974, USC versus Notre Dame in the comeback. USC and Notre Dame have been longtime rivals, drawing thousands of extra fans to the crowd. Every time USC plays Notre Dame is of note. The rivalry game that took place on this game was unlike any other. Sports Illustrated called it the 17 minutes that shook LA. Okay? As the game started, it didn't appear to be an immediate Trojan win. Okay? Notre Dame started off with a 24-0 lead. Notre Dame's line calls were perfectly in line. USC was throwing short passes. Notre Dame had a great first half led by Clemens and Bullock. Trojan fans were losing hope while Notre Dame fans cheered and screamed through the Coliseum. As soon as the clock started for the second half, tables turned when Anthony Davis took the second half opening kickoff back 102 yards. 5 Notre Dame turnovers came next, and soon but behold, Trojans had scored 55 points in a matter of 17 minutes. The Notre Dame did not score once in the entire second half. To this date, the third quarter of the comeback is the most points ever scored on Notre Dame in a single quarter, a day that went down in history for fans in USC football. June 4th, 1977, the Music Sound Funk Festival is played at the Coliseum with attendance of 42,771 people, with performances including Parliament Funkadelic, Bootsy's Rubber Band, Rick James, the Isley Brothers, the Brothers Johnson, and Rolls Royce. 1980. During the 1980s, we wind up seeing huge concerts happening throughout the decade, including Summer Blowout in 1980 with Journey, Black Sabbath, and Cheap Trick. The Rolling Stones in 1981. The Who in 1982. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band in 1985 with their Born in the USA tour. 1987, Pope John Paul II pays a visit to the Coliseum, where on September 15th, he hosted a mass in the Coliseum in front of a crowd of 103,854 people. There were celebrations all across LA, including a 7-mile parade route which attracted hundreds of thousands of Angelenos. In fact, the LA Unified School District canceled classes for the day so that the kids could attend the Mass. The Mass released 500 white doves as a symbol of peace, love, and new beginnings, and featured music by a choir consisting of over 1,200 singers from parishes throughout Southern California. Pope John Paul II was one of the most traveled world leaders in history, visiting 129 countries during his reign as Pope from 1978 to 2005. His goal was to reposition and transform the Catholic Church at its core to create a new religious alliance that would bring together different religions across the globe. USC would perform in November of 1987, Pink Floyd in 1988, Monsters of Rock in 1988, featuring Van Halen, The Scorpions, Dokken, Metallica, and Kingdom Come. Rolling Stones returned with Guns N' Roses and Living Colour in 1989. 1990, Nelson Mandela, who had served 27 years in prison after questioning the apartheid policies in South Africa, had been released from prison and basically came to Los Angeles to speak at a rally for freedom at the LA Coliseum. The event was sold out, attracting more than 70,000 viewers who came to listen to him speak of the suffering of South Africa's black majority. Musicians performed at the event including Ice-T, Babylon Warriors, Tone Loc, and Chris Christopherson, amongst others. As a well-known activist in the anti-apartheid movement, Mandela led the way to the end of apartheid, stopping racial division and advocating for human rights. After 27 years of imprisonment, his speech at the Coliseum was a key destination on his first trip to the United States, featuring 8 cities in 12 days. Nelson Mandela would go on to served as the first black president of South Africa in 1994, shortly after the apartheid policies were lifted. 1991, the Grateful Dead with Jerry Garcia performs at the Coliseum with a 50,000 okay, with a half capacity of 50,000 tickets sold. Still, it was one of the top 5 highest grossing shows of the 1991 season. 1992, Guns N' Roses and Metallica performed at the Coliseum with a okay. It was they marked the 25th anniversary of hosting both Metallica and Guns N' Roses on a co-headlining tour. Oh, not 2017. Okay. The 1996 film Jerry, and it wasn't just that. The Coliseum had also served as the filming site for many films, most notably the 1996 film Jerry Maguire, filmed at the LA Coliseum. Scenes for it was a 1996 sports comedy starring Jerry Maguire, Cuba Gooding Jr., Renee Zellweger, and Regina King. Okay, the film was inspired by the life of sports agent Leah Steinberg, covering his struggles, career venues, and love of life. The film became the ninth highest grossing film in 1996, making 273 million worldwide, up against a $50 million budget. Cuba Gooding Jr. would take home an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. Scenes at the Coliseum were filmed in June 1996, including the first scene introducing top NFL recruit Frank Cushman, played by Jerry O'Connell, in what was supposed to be a stadium in Odessa, Texas. 1996 also saw the U.S. national soccer team taking on El Salvador for their first of their preparatory games for the '98 World Cup in France. This is men's soccer, by the way, not women's. 1998, Coliseum got another film, okay? A sequel to Escape from New York. Escape from LA is a 1996 American post-apocalyptic action film directed by John Carpenter with Kurt Russell starring as Snake Plissken. The legendary basketball scene was shot at the Coliseum. Fun fact, Kurt Russell practiced playing basketball in between scenes because he wanted to legitimately make every shot during the basketball challenge. He made every shot, including the full court one. Into the 2000s, RBD, a Mexican pop group, set the record for highest paid attendance for a Latin concert in the U.S., with 63,101 in attendance. 2007, Dynamite USA, a mixed martial arts event, took place at the Coliseum with a capacity of 23,267. 2012, Roger Waters' The Wall concert. All right, Pink Floyd's Roger Waters performs The Wall in its entirety for the first time since 1990 in front of 42,000 spectators at the Coliseum. The band had also rocked the former the LA Memorial Sports Arena back in 1980. 2016, Rams returned to Los Angeles for the first time since 1979, or played the Coliseum for the first time since 1979, with a preseason game against the Dallas Cowboys. Cowboys won. The Rams beat the Cowboys 28-24 in front of a large capacity, which I really don't remember. It's got to be at least 80,000. Excuse me, guys. $89,140 attended the LA Rams' first game back in LA and the first NFL game to be played in Los Angeles since 1994. Okay? All right. We're almost done here, guys. Okay. What do we do here? Okay. 2020 to present. Let's see if there's any. February 6, 2022, NASCAR kicks off the start of their 74th season with the Busch Light Clash at the Coliseum. The event included a fan fest on Saturday, preliminary heats, and incredible entertainment. Okay, racers powered through 150 laps, maneuvering through the quarter-mile track with bursts of speed. At the 75-lap mark, the crowd was treated to a performance by legend Ice Cube. The race included a lot of action, lead changes, spinouts, and damaged vehicles. When the checkered flag flew, Joey Logano edged out Kyle Busch to be crowned winner in the first ever clash. Okay, and coming soon in 2028, the Summer Olympics, of course. All right. So USC, UCLA, the Dodgers, the Rams and Raiders, and the Chargers have been, even though they have served as legendary tenants. This LA Coliseum has also been host to a wide variety of other tenants who have played the Coliseum on a very minimal basis. Okay, whether it's the league that the teams didn't last very long, or the league didn't last very long, one way or another. All right, so here's a quick list of teams who basically winded up calling LA home. In addition to the teams that we have already mentioned. All right. We have the LA Gatinis of Major League Rugby, who played in 2021 and 2022. You have the 1924 Los Angeles Christmas Festival, a postseason game featuring USC and Missouri. And for those of you wondering how that game turned out, USC won 20-7. It was USC's second bowl game. First was the 1923 Rose Bowl, and it was also Missouri's first ever bowl game ever. You also have the Los Angeles Dons of the defunct All-America Football Conference, who played 1946 to 1949. Okay? The San Francisco 49ers would become part of the AAFC during its early years as well. But after the league folded in 1949, the Dons folded and the 49ers got merged into the National Football League, which created the huge rivalry between the Rams and the 49ers. North California versus Southern California. The LA Chargers of the American Football League in 1960, who relocated to San Diego the following year. You have the Los Angeles Wolves of the United Soccer Association, USA, in 1967. The Los Angeles Toros of the National Professional Soccer League, NPSL, also in 1967. The Los Angeles Aztecs of the North American Soccer League, NASL, in 1977 and 1981. The Los Angeles Express of the United States Football League from 1983 to 1985. Basically, the league only lasted 3 years before they wind up folding due to a huge lawsuit by the NFL. 2000, we saw the Spring Football League, a short-lived league featuring the Los Angeles Dragons. 2001, the first XFL featured the Los Angeles Extreme. Okay, the league only lasted 1 year. Okay, and then last but not least, the Extreme Football League, a women's semi-professional indoor American Football League operating in the United States. You had the Los Angeles Temptation, which played from 2009 through 2011, as well as 2015. Okay, and last but not least, there are a couple of memorable games. Now, when it comes to memorable games, aside from that 1974 game I talked about earlier between USC and Notre Dame, there are two other games that do come to mind in the Coliseum. both of whom are collegiate. Okay, so we do have the first Super Bowl in 1967 and Super Bowl VII in 1973, which wind up seeing the Dolphins' perfect season, and the only time we ever saw a perfect season for the NFL. There are two other games not mentioned that do come to mind that are most memorable that were played in the Coliseum. The first one is in November of 1967, featuring USC and UCLA. USC was the designated home team for that particular game, despite the fact that you had both schools wearing their home colors. USC was basically at the top of its game that year. Okay, they started off in the top 10 at number 7 in the national rankings, and by the third week they were up to the number 1 ranking overall in the country. In the week before the UCLA game, USC wound up losing at Oregon State 3-0, which bumped the Trojans down from number 1 to number 4. And you're not going to believe who took that number 1 seat away. UCLA. So going into this game, you had UCLA, who was the number 1 team in the country, versus USC, who was the number 4 team in the country. UCLA basically dominated through a majority of the game. They were leading in the fourth quarter by a score of 20-14, until a little running back by the name of O.J. Simpson. Yeah, the O.J. Simpson, the Juice, the guy who played for the Buffalo Bills, the guy from the Naked Gun movies, the guy who got away with double murder, and the one from the famous Bronco chase. That's him. In this particular game, he ran a 64-yard play from deep inside the USC zone into all the way to the other side of the field and scored a touchdown over UCLA, which tied the game up at 20 apiece. The point after would put USC on top with a score of 21-20. This particular clip I will be attaching to the description of this video, just so you can experience what I'm describing here. Okay, the one thing that basically defined this game was a missed point after touchdown by UCLA earlier in the game, and that basically is what cost UCLA the game. Now USC came out on top 21-20. It put USC back in the number 1 spot. It gave them the Pac-8 championship title, a trip to the Rose Bowl versus Indiana, which they wind up winning, and it gave USC the national championship. But UCLA didn't walk away empty-handed. They walked away with the Heisman Trophy. All right? And that O.J. Simpson I was mentioning earlier, a moment ago, he won the Heisman Trophy the following year. And after the 1969 season, in 1970, with the NFL draft, O.J. Simpson was the overall number 1 draft pick, where he was picked by the Buffalo Bills. He played most of his career at the professional level with the Bills, except for his last year, which he got traded to the 49ers. After that, O.J. Simpson became a professional sports commentator and film actor until his infamous Bronco chasing trial in the mid-90s, which I will not go further into because we all know what happened there. Okay? And I don't want to put any more wounds I don't want to cause any more wounds that have already been put in there. Okay? The second one was the second memorable game that does come to mind is the 2007 matchup between USC and Stanford. USC came into this game as a 41-point favorite over Stanford, Stanford had just come off a 1-11 record the year before. Okay? They and basically USC had a 24 home game winning streak on the line. Its last loss at the Coliseum, ironically, was the 2001 matchup against Stanford. Yeah, these two do not get along. And these two recently played each other for the last time until further notice. The question is whether or not USC and Stanford are going to continue their long-time rivalry or if it's going to fade into the sunset. Okay? And and who knows whether or not USC will. Okay, they'll probably they might have to choose between Notre Dame or Stanford. We don't know. Only time will tell. But anyway, going back to this particular football game. Late fourth quarter, USC was in the lead. Fourth and down. Stanford passes into a 10-yard pass into the end zone. The catcher has his feet barely in bounds. They wind up having to go to surveillance. They wind up having to go to video replay to confirm that he actually caught it in bounds. And it was confirmed. Score was tied 23-23. Stanford scored the point after 24-23 with less than a minute to go. USC gets the ball back. USC was getting desperate and they were in a hurried rush. And they inadvertently wind up throwing the ball to a Stanford player. Stanford intersected, and that basically cost USC the game. And I cannot forget seeing the tears of all the USC fans in the stands. So satisfying. Okay. Not to mention that the entire 2005 season for USC completely wiped out because of the Reggie Bush scandal. Okay. And we all know that Pete Carroll, he left for the NFL because he knew what was coming and he wanted no part of the punishments. Fucking wuss. Okay. And this is why you don't see me having much respect for him coaching the Seahawks or the She-Hawks. Okay. It's because of his time at USC. Okay. But anyway, by the time Pete Carroll was done at the Coliseum, like USC had fallen apart in the 2009 season, and I'll even show you why. All right. So, coming off a coming off a 2008 Pac-10 championship and a trip to the Rose Bowl over Penn State, USC basically wound up going 9-4 overall, 5-4 in all four losses in the Pac-10. First lost to Washington in September, and then by the time we got to the late October, things really started falling apart. They lost at Oregon, 47-20. 2 weeks later, hosted Stanford. All right. Stanford handed USC their largest loss at the Coliseum ever, 55-21, and their worst loss, and USC's worst loss since the 1966 matchup against Notre Dame. We have that, do we? In which Notre Dame shut out the Trojans 51-0 at the Coliseum. So fans were exiting out of the stadium in the 2009 USC Stanford matchup. Okay. They did beat UCLA the following week, but then when the season finale, they didn't finish against UCLA. They actually finished the season against the Arizona Wildcats, in which Arizona defeated in what was only 1 out of 8 wins for Arizona over USC. One of only 8 times that Arizona had ever defeated USC. Okay, that is. Arizona defeated them 27-21. Okay. They somehow kept themselves in the national rankings that year. And of course, that Stanford game was homecoming. Okay, in front of 90,000 fans. Of course, USC they wound up having to settle for a trip to the Elmore Bowl in San Francisco against the Boston College Eagles. Okay, so that is basically our USC. So that's basically our review. So that's basically our tribute to the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. The Coliseum is not going anywhere anytime soon. It has recently been. They recently gave USC a 100-year extension on our lease, so the Coliseum is going to remain for quite a while. And it'll probably last. I'll probably be dead by the time the Coliseum is done. By the time the Coliseum comes down, if it comes down, all right. But anyway, here, okay. One of the basic things I'm gonna miss about the Coliseum, okay, is that, or I'm gonna remember, or one thing I'll remember. My Arizona Wildcats, since 1978, have been conference rivals with USC, and we would make frequent visits to the LA Coliseum. And even though Arizona has rarely beaten USC, for the most part, we usually stayed. We usually stayed in the game. And playing in that Coliseum has. I've never been to the Coliseum, but I have seen games on TV, and it is such a spectacular venue. And in just a couple of weeks' time, Arizona Wildcats will be playing at the LA Coliseum for the last time ever, or at least until further notice. Because you see, USC, as I mentioned, will be leaving for the Big Ten after this year. USC and UCLA started a massive chain reaction that led to the death of the Pac-12. Okay, you have they basically decided to leave, and then about 2 or 3 months ago, when the TV contracts were yet to be unveiled, you had other schools that the TV contract was revealed, which was a joke. You had other schools leaving as well. Colorado, Utah, Arizona State, all announcing leaves for the Big 12, while Oregon and Washington would announce leaves for the Big 10, along with USC and UCLA. And then you have Stanford and Cal, who recently committed to joining the ACC, Atlantic Coastal Conference, leaving Washington State and Oregon State by themselves and figuring out what to do. Whether to go independent, whether to try to rebuild the pack from scratch, or to basically merge the pack in with another conference and let the pack officially die off. But the pack's dead no matter what. They do. All right. So here is a toast to the LA Coliseum in 100 years of miraculous success. Remember, we don't really have, okay? You don't have to be, okay? As long as you're not playing the Wildcats, okay? There will be times I will root for USC, especially when they play Arizona State. So, here is to 100 years of the LA Coliseum, and here's to the next 100. May your next 100 years be as great, if not better, than the previous 100. And here is to the hopes that the Arizona Wildcats will eventually play another time down the road in the Coliseum after the Pac-12 implosion. Cheers. I needed that too. That's all we have for today. Join me down the road for future Pac-12 updates, as well as Married Children reviews and everything else in between. Till the next time we meet, Mr. Wildcat remind you, okay, sign off in a very controversial manner. Da 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 da. Fight on for OSC. Our men fight on to victory. Our alma mater dear looks up to you. Fight on and win for OSC. Fight on to victory. Fight on. We get shot for that, but you know what? Fuck it! That's what I say. Mr. Wildcat, or Mr. Trojan, for the time being, remind you to be good, be careful, and behave, and fight on.